Hello, friends. It's your buddy Phil here, project management trainer and coach. We're going to talk about a question from our friend Sean on the Facebook group. And the question is, hi Phil, hi Praizion Facebook group. I have a few questions. Sometimes PMI issues uses issues and risks interchangeably. And let me just say right away, Sean, that in and of itself is a problem. So in the questions that you have seen on the PMI mock exam, if they have used issues and risk interchangeably, as I have seen them use, that is a problem which you will likely not experience on the PMP exam because you have more pairs of eyes looking at the real exam, more feedback, more comments. They're likely to have gotten their ducks in a much better row. So I do not see that as being a problem on the real exam, hopefully. Yeah, and you go further to say, I want to have a solid understanding of the differences between the two. Could you think of issues as something you may immediately capture in an issue log? That is, say you, the customer, has weekly meetings with a vendor who is building you a new system. In the weekly status meeting, someone on the customer side brings up an issue about having problems with one of the new servers connecting to the domain that was recently purchased for the weekly project. So right off the bat, let me highlight this again, Sean, because we see this in some of the recent PMI mock exam questions. So issues and risks, they are not interchangeable. However, issues and problems are generally interchangeable. But in the same token, you need to be aware that you could have an issue that is not a problem. An issue, think about it as a topic. Issue is a topic or a misunderstanding or a current event that needs further discussion, clarification, or debate, if you will. Okay, that is my straight up definition, unfiltered, not from the PMBOK guide, not processed. The bottom line is an issue is happening now. Okay? On the flip side, when you think about a problem, very similar, it is a current situation that needs some sort of resolve. You see that? They are both happening now. An issue needs discussion. A problem, on the other hand, in addition to some discussion, typically needs some sort of resolve. A problem could be causing discomfort. Could be. All right? So just keep those things in mind. When we talk about issue resolution, problem resolution in the PMBOK guide, we typically see those interchanged. But not every issue is a problem. You could have a positive issue, something that needs to be discussed to harness a resulting opportunity from an issue. You see what I'm saying? You could have an issue that leads to a positive risk. You can have an issue that leads to a negative risk. So let's put in the definition of risk here. What is a risk? This is going to help you because for the exam, you need to remember risks are, unlike problems and issues, uncertain events. these have not happened. There's no such thing as a risk that has happened. No, a risk is an uncertain event. The moment it happens, it becomes something else. In some schools of thought, a risk is a risk, but when it happens, it becomes an issue. While I do not totally subscribe to that, I do use those definitions sometimes because it helps clarify that a risk is an uncertain event. If it has happened, it's no longer uncertain, is it? See? So you need to think in these little buckets: an issue, a problem, and a risk. So the question is it happening now? If it is not happening now, and it's something you see could happen in the future, we're talking about a risk, an uncertain event. But if it's happening now, you could think of it as an issue. I hope that makes sense. Let's move on with your question. So this is how you distinguish issues. You first capture the issue as an issue in your meeting minutes and then document it in your issue log. So the first documentation of an issue would immediately be recorded as an issue until further analysis. It could be. Or you might suddenly come upon an issue, and the sensible thing to do in direct and managed project work, as you're directing and managing the project work, you're going to come across an issue. And yes, you should document that issue. How I distinguish risks. Then once you analyze the issue further, you discover that this issue, so this is where I would say, watch the language here. So when you have discovered this issue may lead to a risk. So an issue is not a risk, but an issue could lead to a risk. A certain event could lead to uncertain events that need further clarification. So I would say, when you discover this issue may lead to a risk. See that? When you discover this issue may lead to a risk that needs further planning. So that language is I'm just going to take this out. May lead to a risk that needs further planning, analysis, and responses. So the issue would not be transferred to the risk register as a risk. No. The issue could be further analyzed to discover it could lead to risks or could be a problem that needs resolve. So I'd say a risk could lead, an issue could be or lead to a risk which may need further analysis and treatment. At the same time, an issue could uncover a problem that needs resolve. And of course, you know how you resolve the problems, don't you, Sean? You use the dig sieve approach, or you use the ideas C approach. So you use the define the problem, identify the root cause, generate alternatives, choose the best alternative, implement the solution, and verify solution effectiveness. Or if you read up in 9.6, in the PMBok guide, you use the ideas C approach. And you can go read that up, but my preference is the dig sieve, but you get the picture. You need to resolve a problem if a problem is discovered. Okay, so I hope that guides your understanding in that regard. An issue is not transferred to a risk register. An issue is not a risk. An issue could lead to a risk. So a certain event, such as a regulation, could lead to an uncertainty on your project, whatever that may look like, the uncertainty of you not meeting the regulation. So the issue is a new regulation. The uncertainty of you not meeting the regulation is a risk. All right. You go further to say, so the issue could become, yes, the issue could be some problem immediately identified and captured in the issue log. That is correct. Usually done first. So it is not being transferred to the risk register because it is not the same circumstance that we're saying is a risk. It's important that we compartmentalize risks as uncertainty, positive or negative, that can affect the project. Problems, these are happening now, they're causing discomfort. Issues, also happening now, which need further discussion or debate. All right, you went further to say, and the risk recorded in a risk register may have some future impact in the organization. And absolutely, so a risk, that is correct, a risk does need further analysis. Then you said an assumption log where you record your initial thoughts about issues, risks. I would not say the assumption log is where you record your initial thoughts about these, but I would say the assumption log is where you catalog anything you are considering to be true without proof about any project variable. An assumption is anything considered to be true without proof. Okay. And of course, this is also where you would document constraints. What are constraints? Constraints are limiting factors to the project team's options. All right, let's move forward. PMI questions are sort of vague. That is true. That is the world we live in, with a PMI for sure. So I need to tighten my logic around closing. Okay. You achieve last approved deliverable validation from customer. So again, we need to be careful with our language. When we say validation in the world of the 6th edition, validation is different from verification. But when you use the word validation, I would rather use the word acceptance. Okay? I would use verification for quality control. I would use acceptance because it's validate scope, but the output is acceptance. So just remember that. Just remember that. Now you, the consultant working with the customer, would validate all the seller's procurement documents. Again, I would watch the word validate. So instead of using the word validate, for your exam sanity, okay, for your exam sanity, I would say just use the term the PMI do. So I would say here, accept. It's an acceptance. I would say inspect and then accept. It's important that we know what exactly we're referring to so we're not lost on the exam. So the bottom line is this: you inspect and verify, right? You're going to get a verified deliverable. And what are we talking about here? Control quality. In control quality, you are going to inspect, you are going to verify what you are working on for your customer. Okay. In the same token, if you're working with a vendor in control procurement, what are you going to do? You are going to, again, inspect you are going to again do an audit of some sort. So the audits we talk about are different in procurement. You need to read the difference between an audit in managed quality versus an audit conducted in control procurement. Okay, and then you are ultimately going to close the procurement. All right, but in the world of the vendor, you are also doing validate scope because you are the buyer. And in validate scope, the buyer inspects, the buyer uses decision making, and they accept. And we call this an accepted deliverable. Okay, great. So think about it like that. Those are the buckets you should be thinking of. So you then go further to say, now you, the consultant, working with the customer, would validate all the seller's vendor's procurement documents with all the designs, guide manuals, financial invoices. Make sure everything in the contract has been delivered. So that is a step you would carry out in control procurements. Okay, so in control procurement, that is definitely what you do. You make sure everything in the contract has been delivered, make sure you've got all the designs, all the guides, all the manuals, and so on. Number 3, after you validate all the procurement documents, you then could proceed to obtain formal written notice to close procurement from legal. You could, or you could just close it yourself, depending on the organization. That's the bottom line. The bottom line with PMI is they have some overarching framework which could be adjusted company by company. So if you go to the PMBOK guide, you see the general procurement life cycle. The PMI document in chapter 12 what a general life cycle should be for procurement. And all throughout the procurement, that could be changed, it could mold, it could be different. But it's also important when we talk about procurement documentation, we need to ensure we know what we're talking about because there's so many possible procurement documents. So PMI, if you check out page 481, they talk about procurement documentation, and you have a procurement management plan, procurement strategy, the statement of work, in other words, the procurement statement of work, and bid documents. And this is just a few. As you read more, you're going to find more and more procurement documentation. So when we say procurement documents, we need to ensure we know which one, you get what I'm saying, are we really talking about? But going back to the topic about the life cycle for procurement, there's an overall life cycle, but things could change, right? Things could change. So in the very beginning, you have like an overarching plan for the procurement, and then you execute the plan, you award a contract, the seller gets the work done, you close out the contract. That's pretty much it. See? So this overarching cycle in procurements could have a lot of tentacles, a lot of sub activities, if you will. So PMI is not saying it has to be the same life cycle in every procurement. So there could be changes across. So the steps that you have listed out here, those are good steps, but just remember it does not always have to be exactly like that. All right, number 4, you said, and lastly, would close out all the phases, update all the documents, transition final results, write final report, release resources, and lastly, update OPA. So I would rather think about closing not from a procurement perspective, but I would think about closing from a 4.7 perspective. What am I talking about? 4.7 in the PMBOK guide, close project or phase, and there's a specific page that really has what you need to be studying, what you need to be doing. And this page is 123, page 123. So if you take a look at page 123 in the PMBOK guide, I would say page 123 brings it all together. You do need to recall the PMI's approach. It honestly is not rote. And if you leave flexibility in how you perceive it, that will be good because you can tackle exam questions of a wide variety. What I'm trying to make sure you do not do is bottle it up in a rote 1, 2, 3, 4 step assortment, because that's not how it works. It's fluid. Things don't happen and this happens and that happens. No, sometimes the questions are written in an almost chaotic sounding like fashion. So while I do want you to know the components, I want you to know they don't always follow that same rigid order. You see what I'm saying? There's there is some wiggle room for things to happen out of order. For example, if you forgot a step and you've closed out the procurement, what do? The PMI is not always going to give you, oh, all the steps were done. They could give you a question that says, oh, you forgot to get this signed and you've already closed out the project. You've already closed out the procurement. So what do? All right, so let me read what else you have here. You said, then lastly, you could close out all the phase of the project. Lastly, you should update the lessons learned repository, definitely. So you say the bottom line for closing, you need formal written notice from legal procurement administrators in control procurement. Not in the real world. I'll just be honest, that doesn't happen in the real world. This this is a this is a step that in many projects it does not exist. There's no legal, there's no procurement administrator, there's no one except the project manager. So you got to remember there are various kinds of projects and not every project has this step. So you may not have this step on some projects, on some large projects, medium, well regulated type of arrangements, you could, but I also want you to know the exam will not always present this as an option, you see? And as far as the final report and the OPAs, these absolutely should happen. But I also want you to know you could get questions where this first piece, which I'll highlight pink here, this first piece may not exist on some projects. That does not mean that you will not write a final report or update the organizational repository. Am I making sense? So to give you a final picture of clarity, Sean, here is my summary. Here's my summary about all you've asked. I would say know the steps that could possibly happen in closing, but remember that PMI questions are not necessarily written in rote order. Be ready to face questions on the PMP exam that are not conventional. The questions will test your logic on what next if A, B, C happens, but D, E, F was skipped. What happens if D and E were done, but A to C were not? All right. So whenever you encounter these questions, especially on the PMP mock exam, PMI mock exam from PMI, I would really use those as an experience to just get used to how the questions are written. Okay. I also want to give my advice, my 2 cents to everyone out there. It's unfortunate that there's a lot of free stuff out there from PMI, but people are wasting a lot of their money, gonna use other solutions and not getting the full picture of the PMP exam. I would say take the PMI PMP mock exam. The questions are not the best written, but the experience in taking an exam written the way it is can help your actual exam experience. Strongly advise you to do this mock exam. So look, anyone hearing the sound of my voice, if you're taking a PMP exam, you've not taken PMI's mock exam, I'm telling you, you are not acting smart. Don't go wasting your money taking any other mock until you have done their mock. Is it the best? No, it's not. But it is, in my opinion, the best in giving you an idea of the question layout. The question layout is very similar to what you'll find on the actual exam. The rationale given, it stinks. It's horrible. They do a very poor job of explaining why the question answer is what it is. It's pathetic. But in terms of how the question is crafted, the way it's structured, that is why I want you to go through the experience, getting used to the way the words are crafted and the way everything is put together. And then when you encounter that kind of question on the exam, guess what's going to happen? You're going to already had the experience. It's not going to frazzle you as much. All right. So Sean, thank you for the question. Sorry it took so long. It's been a manic month from different angles for me, training, life, stuff. So it took a while for me to get to it, but I'm glad I finally did. I hope this helps you and I hope it helps others. Take care and bye for now.